municipal light department to provide Reading customers a pathway towards energy efficiency and getting incentives for their work. So heat pumps have many different benefits. There's a lot of questions out there of, is a heat pump and can it only heat? No, heat pumps provide both high efficiency heating and cooling. So effectively, they are one unit able to both heat and cool. Um, it also means improved indoor air quality. So it can improve the actual quality of air in your home while providing more efficient heating and cooling. It does have the potential to lower heating and cooling costs in your home. Um, you know, you as RMLD customers are fortunate to have, lower rates. Um, but at the same time, the efficiency of heat pump systems usually far outweigh pre-existing fossil fuel systems. And when combined with other renewable energy or energy efficiency measures, the benefits are even greater. So heat pump systems are heating and cooling systems that move heat indoors in the winter and draw heat outdoors during the summer. So instead of burning fossil fuels, they're powered by electricity and move rather than create heat. That way you can keep a comfortable year-round temperature indoors. Heat pump technology has been around for decades. It's found in air conditioners, refrigerators, other forms of technology. And this is possible because air source heat pumps exchange heat energy with air. So it's possible to pull out cold outside air because of the properties of the refrigerant in the heat pump system. Um, for example, R410A, which is one of the refrigerants in these systems, boils at negative 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So even when the outdoor air temperature is negative 15, it is actually really warm for the refrigerant and is able to pull that thermal energy, which is really cool. But there are a few considerations that you do have to begin thinking about before you plan to install a heat pump system. And I'm actually going to hand it over to Jaime here, who again is the Residential Decarbonization Advisor and someone that, as an RMLD resident, you'll be speaking with throughout your project journey.
Thanks, Paxton. Appreciate it. So, hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to this webinar tonight. I hope you come away from it learning something exciting. Um, there are three important components of designing a heat pump for your house. So, as you can see here, we have distribution, sizing, and something called capacity maintenance ratio, which we'll get into in a little bit. But basically, it comes down to how's the air getting out, how big does the system have to be, and how well does it perform when it gets really cold outside? Did I miss one? Oops. Okay. So there's a lot of different things that you can call a heat pump. A lot of people ask me, is a heat pump and a mini split the same thing? And yes and no. So a lot of the heat pumps that you will see that are in a retrofit application tend to be mini splits like these. You have a ductless system like this where you can put it on the wall, you can put it through the ceiling, floor mount to take the place of a radiator or something like that. It can also be a ducted system, central heat pump, similar to a central air system, and just one that can heat and cool the house at the same time, or not at the same time, but with the same machine. The ducted systems, you have two different versions of those ish, two and a half versions, compact ducted and central. Um, Basically, just comes down to how big of a space you're trying to condition with the ductwork. Uh, One of them has a higher air pressure inside the ductwork. One of them has a lower air pressure, so it can't reach as far. Um, it depends, and when you do the consultation for your heat pumps, when you talk to Abode, we will talk about the benefits and pros and cons of all the different distribution styles for your particular home. So that's the distribution side of things. How is the air getting out? Sizing considerations are the next and possibly most important part of designing a heat pump system for your house. We really call it the Goldilocks effect because you really don't want it to be too big, too small. You really want to get it just right. If you have an undersized system, let's say it's a house like this where you have this big floor plan and only one or two units, mini splits, let's say in this case, to try to service that whole space. What's going to end up happening is that the unit is going to work really, really hard and probably burn out faster than its normal lifespan. Um, these are usually rated for about 15 years of life, so uh, you don't want to undersize it because it could diminish that quite significantly. It can also raise the electricity costs because it's going to be using more energy for that. Um, this one, we don't see this too often, so don't worry too much about undersizing. But basically, it comes down to comfort. It comes down to, overall system efficacy, not efficiency, but efficacy, and just how well it works in the house. On the other side of the equation, this is something we see too many times, which is an oversized system. So in this situation, I kind of liken this to like a car on the highway, right? So you're in cruise control, your car is going super efficiently, whether it's an electric car or a gas car. It's going super efficiently on cruise control. It's using the least amount of energy possible to keep and maintain that. If you then go into a construction zone, you get bumper to bumper traffic. Well, now your car slows down and speeds up and slows down and speeds up. And so it's going to use more fuel, basically. It's going to use more fuel to do that than it would be to just kind of cruise along. So the same kind of thing happens when you oversize a heat pump. When it's a right size heat pump, it's going to be cruising the whole time. It's going to be at cruise control, perfect. When you oversize the system, though, it does something called short cycling. And in the wintertime, that can mean the temperature doesn't stay where you want it to, and it kind of goes up and down way too much. In the summertime, for example, that was wintertime. In the summertime, it can actually lead to humidity issues because it's not running consistently enough to remove enough humidity from the air. So, comfort issues, again, it's going to reduce the length of the lifespan of the equipment potentially. It's going to cost more to run. So, it really is important to get a properly sized system in play. And we'll talk about something called Manual J, which is the sizing calculation, because that's a very amazing holistic approach to sizing a heat pump that is way better than what they used to do, which was stand at the curb and hold a few fingers up and figure out, oh, it's this big, it's this big. No, we don't do that anymore. So when it's just right, you get the peak operating efficiency. It's really going to work the way it's designed to work from the manufacturer. Typical heat pump sizing in New England, we generally are seeing this based on our observations of all the heat pump data that Abode has been able to see over the years. We see, pretty much 90 to 150% of the calculated load. That's that manual J that I was talking about. We'll get into that again. Basically, that's a decent range. If it's sized in that ballpark, we're going to consider that properly sized. It starts getting to red flags when you get into that 150, 200%. We will be looking for that kind of thing when we evaluate the projects and kind of help you make a better decision to size it a little differently for your house. As the house gets bigger, design load of the heat pump and the sizing tend to align more. Um, it's not, it's not hard to size a heat pump properly if they're doing the right calculations. But it is harder to do it in a smaller house. We'll say that. So the larger the building, the more likely it is to be sized correctly uh, right off the bat. So the third part, and we'll go back to some of the stuff and questions and whatnot, and I'll cover this all in our conversations when I have a conversation with you homeowners personally. When you start a project, you'll be talking with me at Abode. So, but yeah, basically the third component. So we had distribution, we had capacity or sizing. And this particular one here, this comes into play. It's called capacity maintenance ratio. This comes into play when you're replacing a fossil fuel completely, or you're replacing an electric resistance system. Um, you're you're basically figuring out at this point with the capacity maintenance, we're saying how much capacity is maintained the colder it gets outside. All the heat pumps that are on the NEEP list that Reading Municipal uses for their qualifications for the rebates and incentives, um, all of them have to meet certain performance criteria, but they're all lab tested essentially. And two of the temperature settings that they usually test at are 47 degrees Fahrenheit for outside temperature and 5 degrees Fahrenheit for outside temperature. So they look at the performance of these systems and they say, well, at 47 degrees, that's a pretty normal day in the, March or so. It's going to put out this much power, or this much heat, this much capacity. And we want to know, well, if it goes to 5 degrees outside, is it putting out this much, this much, this much? And it's an important statistic to think about because the less it can put out as it gets colder, the more uncomfortable you may end up being in the house because it's not designed right. So when I look at different proposals from folks, I look at this capacity maintenance ratio very carefully, especially if the heat pump is going to be their sole source of heat. If you're replacing an oil system or replacing a propane system, um, we want to look at that capacity at 5 degrees and say, right, is it really going to suffice? This is a lot of the reasons why we used to see a lot of oversizing because they would say, oh, well, the capacity maintenance is only 70%, so we'll oversize the system to compensate. The problem with that approach is that you end up with a system that 3/4 of the year or more is too big and it's not going to work as effectively for you. So if you can get the distribution set right, if you can get the sizing correctly, and if you can get this ratio to come up to have a model that has this ratio in a positive light, we should be golden to get you guys all the heat pumps all the time. So, is capacity maintenance being considered when they size the system? A lot of times, like I said, it's not. So we want to make sure that we're stressing this when you're talking to contractors for HVAC stuff. We want to make sure that you guys know that you can talk about capacity maintenance and look smart and know what you're talking about. Um, like I was saying, there's legacy sizing stuff. A lot of contractors will kind of estimate based on square footage, or they may literally stand back at the street and hold up a number of fingers to figure out how big the system needs to be. Go ask my grandfather how he would do that when he worked for the air conditioning business in the 60s. Um, we don't want to use those legacy strategies anymore. We have a new strategy that works really well. So, what about this? Um, We'll cover that in a couple slides, I believe, when we get to the manual J. But one of the things I want to just mention, I know a lot of questions that I get on a daily basis tend to be, well, can this really work if I don't have my oil heat anymore? Like, so yeah, yes, it will if it's designed right. That being said, RMLD does offer a partial home rebate. So if you wanted to keep your fossil fuel, your oil or your propane, um, you can do that. The incentive it goes up to $3,000 for that instead of $8,000 over the loan. But it's an interesting strategy and it can work. There's these wonderful things that they came out with called integrated controls, which are essentially just like a really fancy smart thermostat. And it looks at the outdoor temperature as well as the indoor temperature and basically says, well, at a predetermined outdoor temperature, this thermostat will automatically switch over from heat pumps to your fossil fuel system. So, for example, if you were looking at a system that didn't have a very good capacity maintenance ratio, but okay, that's the system you really want to go with, cool. In that case, maybe it makes sense to keep the oil or the propane in the background and say, all right, well, below this certain temperature set point, which we can adjust, we'll use the oil system. At least that way we'll save oil for, half the winter by using the heat pumps when it's a little warmer out or something like that. So that is definitely a strategy that you can use. But like I was saying, if the system is designed properly from the start, you don't necessarily need to keep that fossil fuel at all. So you may hear the term heat pump and just think, okay, well, that's something. But then you may hear cold climate heat pump. Cold climate air source heat pump is a designation. Technically, the Energy Star folks came out with it. And it basically means that they're tested at 5 degrees. They're tested at all these temperatures to make sure that they do actually have a sufficient amount of performance to work in a cold climate. And I threw this little statistic on here. As of 2023, the state in the United States, the single state with the leading number of heat pump installations by capita was Maine. So I always think about stuff. Well, if it works in Maine, it's going to work in Massachusetts. Maine tends to get a little bit chillier than here. So I would like to see us take that crown so you guys can help out with that. I would like to have Massachusetts take the lead. But basically, yeah, the majority of cold climate air source heat pumps provide effective heating even as outdoor temperature drops to zero. Some of them are even tested below zero. I've seen tests at -13, -15, and these systems are still putting out 60, 70% of their capacity at -15. That's ridiculously good because the number of hours a year that that temperature will actually be realized, very, very small. So you can feel comfortable that if it's cold climate rated and it's got the good statistics that we were talking about, the good capacity maintenance and whatnot, you'll be just fine. Um, like you said, like it says on here, a lot of this has to do with types of refrigerants, more efficient motors, things like that. That's how they get the cold climate rating from the Energy Star folk. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears for a sec. I'm gonna take a second to take a sip. How are we doing on questions so far, guys? Anything we can answer right now before I jump into weatherization?
We do have one question, Jamie. Folks asking where they can find the capacity maintenance ratio for existing heat pumps, noting that some wholesalers don't seem to list it for their pumps.
Good question. So it's not directly easily findable. And that's where somebody like your heat pump contractor or somebody like Abode would come in to help. It is available to the public. You just have to go looking for it. So, for example, on the Abode website that we'll link you to at the end of the slideshow, um, there is a link to the NEEP list. The NEEP database is the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships, NEEP. They have a whole bunch of like ridiculously dorky stuff that gets me really excited about every heat pump. And so if you dive into the NEEP listing, which is another way to tell, by the way, if your system is rebate eligible in RMLD territory, because it has to be on that list to be rebate eligible. There's roughly 200,000 products on there, so hopefully easy enough to navigate. But if you put in your reference number, the AHRI reference number, you'll be able to find the right model, and it'll be on that. And there's the one that we would look at specifically is a capacity maintenance of the rated output at 47 degrees versus the maximum output at 5 degrees. So yeah, but I will get into well, actually Paxton will cover later on. One of the services that Abode offers through RMLD is a quote comparison service, and we will look at that as part of that quote comparison for free. So, but yeah, it is available. It's just a little nuance to find. Good question. All right, so we're going to talk about weatherization as well because the incentive program that RMLD launched back in March requires the house to be sufficiently weatherized. So what does that mean? For every heat pump installation that gets done, we really want the house to be, kind of in the right mindset if you think about it that way, to get the heat pump operating the most effectively for the building. So in this situation, weatherization is everything from insulation, air sealing, windows, doors, duct work, ventilation for the attic, and and appliances is not really weatherization, but it's on there. Um, the incentives that our RMLD has are specifically for insulation, air sealing, and ventilation, as far as weatherization goes. So a lot of times folks ask me, well, do I have to replace all my windows to qualify for the heat pump rebate? No, you do not. Um, what we're really looking for is the biggest kind of bang for the buck stuff that makes the house more airtight, makes it uh, cozier, and it just makes it more able to retain its heat or cooling depending on the season. So insulation is definitely the biggest one. Walls, attics, garages, basements, that kind of stuff. Um, Adding insulation to get up to essentially what our partners at Mass Save have come up with a really good metric for what a sufficiently insulated house entails. And so we're basically saying R49 for attics, R15 for walls. Good. Air sealing is targeting drafts in the attic and basement. And so they actually use a little bit of like expandable spray foam under the existing insulation in the attic. And they seal up gaps where like wall tops meet or pipes come through the floor, wires come through, stuff like that. And then ventilation is something that's kind of included de facto for every weatherization job that gets done through the program. Basically, building code in Massachusetts requires an attic to be ventilated to a certain ratio. Um, Square footage of ventilation per square footage of attic being insulated essentially. And so it's included in there and it's included in part of the weatherization rebates as well, which is a very nice thing because it makes your house up to code. So many, many benefits to insulation and weatherization in general. Number one, weatherization reduces the need for heating and cooling in the house. Straight up. It's like it's like closing the windows in the car. You can keep the heat in the winter. It's great. Um, Same kind of situation with the house. If you tighten up the house, the heat stays in a lot better. And if you're air conditioning the house in the summer, you're going to actually keep that heat from outside from getting in. So it makes the AC work a lot better. Lowers your energy consumption, which in turn lowers your carbon emissions. There are health and safety improvements because the indoor air quality is better. You're not basically relying on drafts coming through your walls to get fresh air for your home anymore, which is nice. And increased comfort. So it's going to just be a lot easier to stay comfortable in the house all year round. Oh, lost my Paxton. Can you there we go. Okay, relevance to heat pump sizing. So this is where we start talking about that manual J thing that I was referring to a couple times. And people are like, well, what is manual J? So manual J is actually from the Air Conditioning Contractors of America, or ACA. They came up with these manuals, literal manuals. And there's one for ductwork, there's one for sizing, there's one for you name it, whatever has to do with air conditioning and heating, it's there. So Manual J is essentially how a heat pump contractor is going to determine the heat load of the house. So it looks at the house holistically. So we're looking at insulation levels. How well is the house insulated? We're looking at how good the windows are. They're going to look at what's the air infiltration in the building like? Is it leaky? Is it tight? Is it in between? They're going to look at like the volume of space. Do you have a really tall room, for example, with a cathedral ceiling? All these things kind of take into consideration that, for example, a Somebody who's calculating it based on size per square foot is not going to know. So the holistic approach here means that it's going to take all these variables to your unique house and look at them together and figure out, all right, well, based on this, room by room, this is the heat, the amount of heat that is going to be needed and the amount of cooling that is going to be needed to keep it right, keep it comfortable. One of those things that I just mentioned was insulation. So in this respect, this is one of the main reasons that this program wants to emphasize the importance of weatherization is because it matters to the heat pump sizing. The more weather tight, the more airtight and weatherized your house is, the smaller the heat pump has to be. So when they're doing this manual J calculation, you may have little to no insulation in your house. Let's say it's a 1940s ranch or something. There's almost nothing in that house for insulation. They should be looking at what it's going to be, not what it is. Because we're going to go under this assumption that all the contractors in the program are going to go to the same spec for the installation. That's what we've told them to do. And so you can basically be guaranteed that at the end of this process, your house will be insulated a certain way. And so when they do this manual J calculation, which is a requirement for the whole house rebates for sure, and for the 0% loan, um, it's important to understand that insulation will be changing. And so it's really is a really important thing to consider, because what would happen otherwise is that they size it for a house that's super leaky. You tighten the house up, and now all of a sudden the heat pump is going to be oversized and it's going to do that bumper to bumper traffic short cycling thing again. We don't want that. So keep that in mind. It's a very important thing. It takes some effort for the contractor, so I would only encourage you to generally have this done one time. So one of the contractors that comes out to give you quotes for your heat pumps should be the one that does this, and that kind of result, like you see here, for example, that's the heating BTUH, that's the BTUs per hour, British thermal units per hour, in this middle box here. So like for example, that piece of information will be able to be shared with the other contractors that are giving you heat pump quotes and say, all right, well, now we know what size this should be. We're going to target these for this kind of heat pump sizing for all our other quotes. Hopefully that makes sense. And if not, call me. All right. Next slide. I don't know, I lost control of the screen. All right. So yeah, so requesting the manual J size and calculation from your installer is definitely, like I said, one of the most important things at the beginning of the process. We want to make sure that they're quoting models that meet the specific demands of your situation and are on the NEEP list, the NEEP database, rebate eligible. When you talk to the different contractors, talk to them about where they're putting these things. Where's the outdoor unit or units going to go? Where's the refrigeration chase going to run off the side of the house? Is it going to look a certain way? Do they need access to stuff? Do they, where are the interior units going if they're mini splits or not? They should look at the electric panel, all this kind of stuff at the same time. Um, there's a nice little up to $1,000 rebate from RMLD for upgrading your electric panel to 200 amps if you need to. So to keep that in mind too. Um, Another thing to ask them about, which I didn't put on this slide, ask them about their warranty coverages. Ask them about their service plans. Department of Energy recommends that most heat pumps get serviced once a year, and that's kind of a general piece of advice from the DOE, but pretty good advice in my mind. A lot of it's preventative maintenance, a lot of it's visual inspections, but it is an important thing to get ahead of any potential issues that they could find. But yeah, you want to know their warranties. You want to know if they're recommending different brands, for example, what does one brand have advantages over the other? Just because it's a bigger name doesn't necessarily mean it's a better warranty, for example. So And then the last thing would be to confirm their availability to help with the rebate process. Most of the contractors that work with us are pretty versed in the RMLD rebates. And we do have a participating contractor list that you can choose from. So, but yeah, Paxton and I are also here to help with that at any point as well. I think I'm gonna throw it back to you now, Paxton.
Thanks, Jamie.
You got it.
All right, so we're gonna switch over to what everyone is wondering here is how much do heat pumps cost? So air source heat pumps really range. In the RMLD area, it might be slightly different than other areas of Massachusetts, but in general, in the region, air source heat pumps really range widely in cost. You can go from one contractor to the next and get honestly very different quotes, ranging in thousands of dollars. So it's important to understand why and to see if some of these factors are, leading to the high cost, whether it could be the, contractor quoting you a higher cost, the quality of install, just like Jamie had kind of spoken about earlier, is really considering multiple factors in the home. How well is your home weatherized so that the tightness of your home can actually have a direct impact on the size of your heat pump system, how effective the heat pump system operates. So those two things are related. Whether or not it's a ducted system or a ductless system. One of the first slides that Jamie had up there was a bunch of different system distribution styles of mini split or floor mounted units. There's ducted systems where it'll really depend on whether or not you have pre-existing ductwork in the home. So it's really important to talk to a specialist, and we are there as independent, advisors for you during this project. So that has a lot of value to it, because we can help, guide you in the right direction. We will leave it to the professionals out in the home, but we can provide extensive advising services to you as you make these major investments. So the $5,000 to $8,000 per ton kind of quote there is based on tonnage. So these systems are designed in tonnage, and it can really range depending on your home's layout. So, as Jamie had mentioned, the smaller units and homes typically see oversizing. So it's important to understand how oversizing could also relate to an overpriced system. It'll depend on brand, equipment, warranties, the contractor. There's a lot of variables. And just going back to the weatherization aspect thing, we are going to get into a little bit more about rebates, but first we're going to talk about kind of utilizing the tools available to you and provided by Abode to really break down the different quotes you're receiving. We're always recommending customers get multiple quotes. This is a large investment. And one way to kind of break down these quotes and break down all this technical, technical verbiage and understanding of things is to reach out to us and see if maybe a quote comparison is a proper pathway. So Abode does provide a no-cost quote comparison to Reading municipal customers, and this will actually give us a better idea of the sizing in the home. We're taking multiple factors into consideration, so we're gonna be able to look at the existing fuel usage and use that and compare it to the actual manufacturer data of the heat pump system. So, you would create a account online on the Reading website, and you'll see a link to that shortly. And you'll be able to create a account and username in this portal, upload quotes, upload information about your, preferences, and maybe you're looking at saving money, maybe you're looking at reducing your carbon footprint. So we'll be able to take this information and provide you with a detailed report breaking down the different systems. So just to give you a sense of what this looks like, this is a example report. So you have three just example systems there, 2 indoor units to 2 outdoor units, 3 indoor units to 2 outdoor units. So these are all kind of different variations, but you can see how widely they vary in cost. And this is a real example in a MLP community. So the report will actually give you an estimate of the expected annual heating and cooling costs, how it'll compare to your existing system based on that fuel usage, or in addition to that, a manual J report can also help support the review of this process. So the report will basically spit out a system fit score, looking at, again, the sizing, the performance, cost of operation of the system, as well as the environmental benefit, the CO2 reduction of the unit. And again, this is just another look at kind of the breakdown here. So this is one quote in particular. You can see kind of the current system cost. You can actually see a breakdown of the sizing. You'd want it to be within that green zone. Right in the middle is a perfectly sized system, and that's likely why the system receives such a high rating here. And you can see to the left, the more technical details are what are being captured and utilized in this software and this report creation. So you'll actually have an opportunity to work with a specialist to review your quote if you do choose to do so. In the next phase of things here, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the rebate process and kind of what these services we are providing you, and a little bit more about what Jaime had discussed earlier of these consultations and audits being performed by for weatherization. So first, we recommend that you schedule a Abode virtual consultation. So these consultations will support you throughout the process. They will help advise you on, next steps, whether or not you are kind of thinking about heat pumps, if you're thinking about these energy efficiency upgrades, or if you're already starting to get quotes for heat pump systems, or you're maybe just starting with, insulation, air sealing, but you hope to eventually take on a heat pump project. So the first requirement would be to schedule this virtual consultation with us. We also are then recommending customers go out and choose from a list of contractors for a weatherization work scope. So a contractor is going to come out. They're going to provide a kind of high, a very in-depth report of your home that is reviewed prior by Abode and post-install by Abode. So we're actually looking at what the recommendations are in the home, specific line item by line item measures. We're looking to make sure that contractors are following statewide standards in both install quality as well as pricing. So these contractors are familiar with the Mass Save program. They're familiar with municipal light plant programs. We know that there's a few different types of customers in the room today, and this is, again, speaking about the Reading Municipal Light Department customers who are eligible for the program, as Mass Save would have a different energy assessment process. And we can talk a little bit more about that to come. And these steps are no cost. Everything on the screen here. So starting with the consultation to the contractor coming out and providing this preliminary report of your home that Abode is reviewing. We would then recommend going out and getting a few different quotes for heat pump systems. You might already have a contractor and are familiar with, and that's okay when it comes to the heat pump side. Just recommend that, those contractors look at the Reading webpage to be a little bit more familiar with the specifics of the program, as these programs can vary, especially for contractors who might be familiar or more familiar with other programs. So we do offer a list of heat pump participating contractors there as well. So it makes it easy for you to go out and look for these quotes. So prior to install, you'll be at this point, you'll be selecting what rebate you're going for. And shortly we'll go into the actual rebates and incentives that are offered by RMLD, but there are three options. There's a whole home heat pump rebate, a whole home heat pump zero interest loan, or a partial home heat pump rebate. So these are three different incentive options. Most of them have the same requirements, the manual J requirement, some upfront information that you should be receiving from your contractor upon proposal. So you want to basically collect all this information ahead of time and upload it on the incentive application to ensure that you are eligible for RMLD incentives. If you do have any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us, and we'll provide some contact information at the end. And again, the best place to go, and all this information is directly on the abode.energy/RMLD webpage. So here at this step, the step 4, this is a customer, step that you can work with your HVAC contractor with, or your heat pump contractor. You would have already gotten a assessment from a weatherization contractor, and either there's been no weatherization opportunity, you're already considered sufficiently weatherized, and you have proposals in hand for the heat pump project. So that brings us to step 5 here. So you install, and contractors will need to complete post-install quality assurance documentation that is sent over to Abode. There is a few town-specific requirements that you want to make sure your contractor is on top of, including a town wiring inspection. Again, the quality assurance form. You want to make sure you've completed all prior steps for the program. You understand the different pathways, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a little more detail on the next slide about the different pathways. So this is a table breaking down the 3 incentive options. We heard Jaime discuss kind of the difference between, the partial home system and a whole home system. So a
Yeah, and
partial home.
Paxton,
Yes.
I'll go over the rebates, just in the next slide or two. So I'll really
Great.
dig into those. Yeah.
Awesome. So just for everyone to know, this table and all this information is right on the web page there. So again, this is just kind of a high level look at the different requirements. And I will pass it over to Kyle for the next slide, and he'll, like he said, go into a little bit more detail about the RMLD rebates. And one more slide is federal tax incentives, which we can't forget about. There is a pretty hefty tax incentive available to customers. It's 30% up to $2,000 right now for heat pump technology. It is also applicable to, there's additional incentives that are applicable to weatherization, electrical upgrades. You do want to look on the IRS website. You do want to stay updated for any changes, but these incentives are current as of May 20th, tonight, and are subject to change. So you should check these out and try to look at the full range of incentives that you may be eligible for as you're pursuing these projects. And now I will hand it over to Kyle on the RMLD side.
Thank you, Paxton. So a lot of information I know, but I feel like we all know heat pumps a little better now. But now I'm sure the question you all are asking yourself is, what about the money, right? So RMLD offers 3 different options, 2 rebates and a zero interest loan. The two rebates are for whole home systems and partial home systems. Um, the whole home system, as we mentioned before, we break it down and measure it by tonnage. And so the rate for the whole home is $2,000 a ton up to $8,000. And for if you're replacing a system, the rate is $400 a ton up to $4,000. And for the partial home system, the rate is $1,000 a ton up to $3,000. And for a replacement ton, it's $200 a ton up to $2,000. Now, in addition to those, the heat pump tonnage rebates, to help cover the cost of weatherization, there's a weatherization rebate baked in to those, either the partial home or the whole home. And that is 50% of the cost up to $3,500. So say if you spend $5,000 on weatherization, we would cover 2,500 of that. And the question of who is eligible, so it's any RMLD residential customer that chooses to install heat pumps as their primary home in RMLD territory. And as we mentioned before, this process starts with a free consultation from Abode, and as they went into detail before, they'll help you guide you through the process. RMLD and myself specifically, as the person who processes the heat pump rebates, really comes sort of in at the end of the process to review everything and to get that check out to you. And it is a check that gets mailed out to you physically. Just one thing of note is applications must be received within 180 days of the final town wiring inspection. So when you get the project inspected at the end, theoretically, you just have to make sure you get your application in within 6 months. If you go to the next slide, Paxton, that'd be great. And so in addition to those two rebates that I mentioned, the third option that RMLD offers is a 0% interest loan. And we do this having partnered with the Reading Cooperative Bank, local bank, great partner for this. It only applies to the whole home rebate. So you have to be fully replacing your existing heating and cooling system with a heat pump to be eligible for this loan. The loan is up to 7 years, fixed interest, 0%. And the loan amount ranges from 10,000 to 40,000. The details of which obviously you work out with the bank, not RMLD specifically. So while you cannot, let's say, double dip and get the tonnage rebate for your whole home system and the loan, you can get the loan instead of, but we do offer the add-on for the weatherization rebate that I mentioned earlier. So that 50% of the cost up to $3,500 is in addition to whatever you would get from the loan. And here we just want to clarify this is true for the whole home system as well, but the systems that serve 100% of the home's living space by volume and supply between 90 and 120%. This is what Jaime was talking about earlier, making sure that your systems are appropriately sized for your home. And again here, who's eligible? Any RMLD residential customer who installs a heat pump that covers the entirety of their home and is their primary heating and cooling system. And so how this works is Abode will actually, you'll still meet with Abode. The process is the same. You express an interest in the loan and you apply specifically for the loan program. They will let us know, you provide us a quote or provide them with a quote from your heat pump contractor, your weatherization contractor. We look that over. Then we determine the eligibility based on those quotes. And we tell the bank you're eligible, and then you work out the loan details with the bank. And I think that about covers it. Yeah, so I'll pass it. We just have some contact information here
Yes.
for Abode. And then ourselves as well here at RMLD. If you have questions, We will stay on for a Q&A. I know we want to respect everyone's time, but we're happy to stay on and answer a few questions that we didn't get to cover during the presentation. But if you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to rebates at RMLD, or you can always give our main line a call, speak to our lovely customer service representatives. And if they can't answer your question, then they'll put you through to me.
And if Kyle can't answer it, I'll help out after that.
Yes, yeah, and then all the technical questions I'll push over to Abode.
I do have a couple
Thanks,
of
Kyle.
questions in the chat that I'd love to ask live, just that we hadn't been able to address. We were able to address, I believe, the majority of them as folks were posting them. So so definitely, as Kyle mentioned, reach out to rebates@rmld.com with any specific questions or questions that are around your specific scenario. If you have a rebating process or you're not sure how to get started, or you've started the piece with Abode or with the RMLD team and you just have more detailed questions, please do that. Through that, it'll be most productive because then we can address you specifically. A couple questions that may be stuff we can answer, and if they can't, team, feel free to let me know. The first one, a customer asked, can a system be retrofitted to current flexible ducts? I don't know if that's a contractor position or if we can answer that.
You're probably talking about high velocity ductwork, which in most cases, yes, the answer is yes, but not always. So I would encourage you to talk to your contractor on a case-by-case basis in this sense, like to have them evaluate the existing ductwork. Most important thing to remember is that I believe there are only there are only 19 systems that are approved for high velocity as far as rebate eligibility goes. They're not as prominent in the heat pump world as they were in the central AC world. So talk it over with us, talk it over with Kyle, and we'll see if we can get you in there. But in general, yes, but it's a cautious yes.
One more question, just to clarify for some folks. Customers that are natural gas customers as their primary heat, can we confirm whether they are eligible or not for RMLD incentives, or they are required to go through Mass Save?
Great question. The answer is you would default to Mass Save, but if for some reason you did not want to use the Mass Save program, you would basically get in touch with rebates at RMLD, say, hey, I'm forfeiting my Mass Save rebates and incentives and whatever, and I would like to use the RMLD ones instead. You cannot use both.
Yes, and just echoing, the default would be to go to the Mass Save program, and there are a range of services, and just for context, that the Reading Municipal program, is kind of based off of a lot of the same services and incentives that are provided through the Mass Save program. So I would recommend looking there first and taking a deep dive, talking to your contractor about it. And also, there are services available and comparable to what Abode is doing here, also on the Mass Save side.
Yeah, Abode has a whole team of Mass Save consultants as well that work basically doing the same kind of consultations for Mass Save. So if you're a Mass Save customer, just go to the Mass Save website and be able to get it from there.
Yeah. Another customer asked a question about a scenario that they're looking at, possibly installing a heat pump in their garage because the floor above it remains very cold, and they're hoping that the heat from the heat pump will help that floor above. Is that something that we could weigh in on, or would that be, more a site-specific question?
It sounds more site specific. I think that's probably not the it doesn't sound like a very cost effective plan to me, to be honest, but because garages typically aren't insulated. Um, I would probably recommend for that particular person, first of all, have a consult with us if you'd like to talk more about it. But I would talk to an insulation contractor first before anything else.
And you would be talking if you do plan to pursue this, would be again partial home, and that would not be you would not be looking at the whole home rebate or incentive or loan option.
Another customer is questioning how they would know if they needed to upgrade their electrical system to handle a new heat pump system.
The majority of heat pump systems are, at least at this point, are probably going to need a 200 amp panel. Um, it can be done at 100 amps, but it's not as common. So if you have an older electric panel or fuses or stuff like that, the chances are good you're going to have to upgrade. RMLD does chip in, like I said, up to $1,000 towards that. There's up to a $600 federal tax credit for panel upgrades as well. Um, I like to encourage people to do a lot of electrification at the same time, or at least planning for it. So, for example, if you're upgrading your panel to a 200 amp panel, go ahead, pre-wire it for the EV charger that you might get sometime. Pre-wire it for potential solar down the line. Pre-wire it for an induction stove for your kitchen, stuff like that, while you're doing that panel upgrade and economize on the electrician being there.
And I would just note that there are, some options and some range of possibilities available to customers who might be cutting it close. If you do meet with an electrician and it could be feasible, but there are other paths to possibly kind of share the load among your appliances so that you can make a heat pump work. So it's important to consider a few different variables there.
I'd also add that just thinking, the way that our rebates work is we're constantly evolving them to try to meet needs like this. So definitely continue to check as you're looking at your system and what the needs will be and see what rebates are offered. Often, as the team here has mentioned, there are other rebates that you may be eligible for, whether it's a load management device or something that would help support in addition of a system. Okay. This question is specifically around whether a customer can purchase their own heat pump equipment and then have a specialist install it and still qualify for a rebate for the equipment and the work done.
So for this question, I would definitely recommend starting with a Abode consultation. There are prepackaged heat pump systems on the market. There are some fairly good prepackaged heat pump systems on the market. And when we say prepackaged, this basically takes away the need of the installer from touching refrigerant, which you would need a licensed HVAC specialist to do that. However, it does not take away the required electrical work that would need to happen from a licensed electrician. So we generally advise against it because customers are not, depending on, if you are a general contractor, have some experience. But when it comes to those sizing considerations, it's going to be more challenging and you might not have the ability or the capacity to really make an informed decision. And also, some projects might start out, as a passion, but also can be very costly if you do wrong. And heat pump systems are one of those things where you want to make sure you're doing it properly. So again, it's possible and it happens, but I would do your research, reach out to Abode, talk to an electrician. So that's my best advice.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. I'll try to get to all of these before we wrap. Our customer's questioning whether we expect that there will be delays in getting system equipment and whether we could weigh in on expected costs to increase if we see it increasing significantly for heat pump systems.
Yeah, this might be a two-part question or both Jaime and I answering this one because it is there's a lot going on. There's a lot of we're lucky to be in a state where there's a lot of initiatives around energy efficiency improvements, especially heat pump technology, that is helping the marketplace. But at the same time, there are volatile, market conditions that are always changing, that can have a direct impact on the cost of, heat pump systems and equipment. So that could include tariffs. It could also include a recent mandate for refrigerant transition. So it's a good idea. Again, and these are things that you can talk about in a consult, that heat pump systems are going to be uh, mandated to use a new refrigerant, an A2L refrigerant, which has less global warming potential. And this means that there are, supply and distribution disruptions that are happening in the marketplace. However, as Jamie mentioned, there's 200,000 systems, there's thousands of systems out there, and there is a lot of options. There's also a lot of contractors out there. So it's really worth, taking your time if you have it to be able to kind of compare your options. But what I will say is on the other side of things is that right now is the best time for taking advantage of incentives. It's likely we're at the peak of, all incentive offerings, you know, federal level, possibly state level. So there's a lot of great incentives out there. So you do want to take advantage while they're there.
Just curious about a general cost difference between installing a heat pump system and a propane system.
Well,
And like,
okay, so I don't know too much about the propane system other than one major thing. It's not going to give you air conditioning. The heat pump gives you full house heating and full house air conditioning in the same unit. So if you're just comparing it to the price of a propane system or an oil system, the oil and propane systems are probably going to be less because they don't have that central air component. Um,
We'll also note that the actual operational cost is an important factor because
True.
the cost of operation for a propane system
And
is
an
one
oil
of those,
system, yeah.
yeah, it is one of those systems where if you're transferring away from propane to a high efficiency cold climate heat pump system, you're very likely to see cost benefits in your month to month
Yeah,
bill. You'll have higher
oil the same way,
in
specific,
oil.
yes. Even natural gas customers, because of the lower electric rate that RMLD has, as compared to a National Grid or an Eversource customer, it's actually slightly more cost competitive for natural gas customers to change over to heat pumps in RMLD territory as well.
And it can vary, and again, that's why it's important to really take into sizing and design considerations,
And insulation.
and the prices of, gas and, all these are subject to change. So there is volatility, but confidently that the propane system to a high efficiency heat pump system will likely save you money.
With a heat pump, yeah, absolutely.
okay, that is all of our questions for today. That was a lot of really good information. As I mentioned earlier, we will save out this recording as well as the full set of slides, and we will post that. We will share those directly with all of the registered attendees, and then we'll post on our YouTube channel later this week. So if anyone has any additional questions, you know where to find us, rebates@rmld.com. And we look forward to getting all of you guys moving on some heat pump transitions.
It was great to talk to you all tonight. Thank you so much for sticking around.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Good night.